Started the router and everything before I started this broadcast, and apparently that's not a good idea. Let's see, part 2, are we on? Well, that's going to be a commercial. Okay. Anyway, I was talking about Sicario and how that might potentially be a trilogy. Now, it looks like yeah, I totally lost the plot now. Blah 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 blah. They interviewed some of the filmmakers, and one of the guys there was saying that Taylor Sheridan, the writer, he always kicked around the idea that this was going to be a trilogy. Co-producer Lukinbill was saying, he has a weird name, he has a lot of ideas of where he could take these characters, and I was like, okay, that's great. But then what really got me interested, apparently one of those characters is FBI agent Kate Mercer. And if you remember who Kate Mercer is, if you've never seen Sicario, obviously nothing of that means anything to you. But Kate Mercer was played by Emily Blunt in the first Sicario movie. Now, you've probably heard me talk about the first Sicario movie in the lead up to the second one that I'm reviewing today. And that I'm not very happy with it because it looked like Emily Blunt was the headliner, like she was the lead in it. And then I watched the film and she was basically just supporting cast to Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro. And I was very, very disappointed because of that, which kind of made me disappointed in the film that I would have otherwise probably really liked. But this kind of pissed me off. So let me just... Okay, so that is still working. I don't know why the internet fucked up. But now it looks like Emily Blunt obviously is not part of the second one because you've not seen her in any trailers and on the poster, any promotional materials. Yeah, let's just change to this. It's like Emily Blunt is nowhere to be seen on that, right? But it is likely that she could return for the third film if that gets greenlit. And Luckenberg continues that Taylor has a master plan. For this one, I think he really just wanted to explore Josh and Benicio's characters. Who knows what Taylor has up there? He may have 30 Sicario movies that he's thinking about. Now, if he brings Emily Blunt back, I think I will probably have to revisit the first one as well. Like if it turns into a proper trilogy, I will probably have to see it all in one go. Not judging, but from this news bit, let's go into talking about Sicario 2, Day of the Soldado. Obviously, as I said, Emily Blunt's not part of this, and this is more about Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro's characters. Now, if you've seen the trailers, you obviously know that. So the synopsis for the second one, for Soldado, is FBI agent Matt Graver, who is played by Josh Brolin, calls on mysterious operative Alejandro Gillick, or whatever you pronounce this, when a Mexican, who's Benicio del Toro, when Mexican drug cartels start to smuggle terrorists across the US border. The war escalates even further when Alejandro kidnaps a top kingpin's daughter to deliberately increase the tensions. When the young girl is seen as collateral damage, the two men will determine her fate as they question everything that they are fighting for. Now, I got this off Wikipedia, and I don't necessarily really agree with that synopsis. There's this whole thing, it's like, obviously we have Josh Brolin's Matt Graver, and one of the things in the film was also like, I didn't really get kind of a connection to the characters at all. Like for me, it was always like, that's Josh Brolin, that's Benicio del Toro. I never thought of him as like, what's his face, Matt Graver and Alejandro something. I was like, no. There's a weird disconnect there. It was really bizarre. I didn't have that as much in the first one. But it's this whole thing that it's like this really silly plot or just like almost like exposition piece that you need in order to get the plot rolling. And that is that a bunch of people get into the US with suicide vests, and they blow up a supermarket, killing a bunch of people, including 2 children. And that's when Matt Graver is being put on a plan. And they're like, we need to sort something out. How did they get into the United States? Oh, they came over the US-Mexican border. And that's when okay, so we need to investigate there. Which is why we go back to the setting of the first Sicario. the US-Mexican border and all of that stuff. Now, this is where the film could have potentially gotten really interesting, because it talks about immigration and terrorism and violence, especially violence towards and around children. There's like a lot of really heavy-handed shit there. But the problem is that the film never really delves deeper. They just show it to you, but they don't actually deal with it. It's really weird. It's just like they're just throwing all that shit at you and just see, like, they don't even want to see what sticks. They just throw it at you and that's it. And that was really, really annoying. By the way, obviously the film is starring Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro in the 2 lead roles. There's not really a female lead here. To be fair, even the first Sicario didn't have a female lead because Emily Blunt was not a lead. Let's just be fucking honest here. She was just supporting. And I was really, really disappointed in that. But we also have Isabella Moner and Elijah Rodriguez in this. They are playing 2 teenagers. Isabella is playing the girl that is being kidnapped. And Elijah is playing a US-Mexican teenager who kind of like gets involved in the cartels. And those guys, I thought they did a really good job. Like overall, I thought the performances were really solid, were really good. Which is obviously something that you expect from Brolin, you expect it from Benicio del Toro. Benicio del Toro is very, very captivating, just like he was in the first one. But the problem is that in the film, you don't really get to know much more about them. Like in the first one, we found out that he's going up against the cartels because one of the cartels, prime drug lords, whatever, murdered or had his family murdered, his wife and his child. And in this one, I can't remember whether we already found that out in the first one, but in this one we find out that the child was also deaf. There's a scene later on in the film where that comes out, and usually you would say it's like, oh, we're getting some information, like some background information about a character. That is usually really interesting, that is engaging, especially if it's a character we are kind of into anyway. But the problem is that the film just doesn't really know how to handle the characters. You have 2 very charismatic leads here with Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro. Brolin, like, I like him, but it just felt like he was just going through the motions. I was engaged, but I wasn't emotionally engaged, if that makes sense. Like, you have really solid performances, you have good action sequences, there are some great shootouts happening in this film, but overall it all felt very technical but emotionally disconnected. Like, I was watching it and I was entertained and I was paying attention, and sooner or later, obviously in the second act you always have a tiny bit of pacing issues, but I thought they were negligible. It was not as important. And I was watching it, and as the film was finally over and the credits started rolling and the music was playing, and I just sit there and let the music play over me so I can kind of like process what I've just seen. And my first reaction was like, I am emotionally totally unattached to this film. Like, I have no emotion towards this film. I felt totally neutral. I felt so Swiss about this. It was absolutely ridiculous. I was like, but it wasn't a bad movie, and I was like, why am I so unaffected by the film? Like, I watched it, it's like you have a meal. It's not delicious, but it's also not disgusting. You just eat it because you have to eat, because that's kind of what your body needs you to do. And then you're like, yeah, it wasn't good, it wasn't bad, it just was. And that's kind of what this film is as well. Like, it doesn't affect you in any way. You digest it as you're watching it. And I wouldn't even say that I was entertained, but I was engaged. Like, I wasn't bored. It's not a bad film. I wasn't bored. I didn't feel like I wasted my time or my money or anything. But I also wasn't affected by it. And I was really surprised by that, because I'm usually emotionally affected by everything. Like, you can show me a plane break and I will be emotionally affected by that. You know, like the whole floating trash bag in American Beauty. I was like, oh my god, that really got to me. So yeah, I'm usually emotionally affected by soap. okay? But I wasn't by Soldado at all. And there are things in the film that I'm not going to spoil, but there is something near the end that happens, and I was like, oh my god, I can't believe you guys just did that. And I was like, nah, man, that's part of a ruse, or that's part of a plan, or that's just part of whatever. But it's like, it was so ridiculous and laughable that I laughed out loud in the cinema. And it's kind of like, it's supposed to be a very shocking scene and potentially distressing scene, and I was just I just went like, what the fuck. And no one seemed to have really been engaged with it, which I thought was also quite telling. And I was like, that's really, really weird. Interesting, well, not interesting film, but an engaging film, but totally emotionally unconnected to the viewer, because there's no one you can connect to. I didn't give a shit about Brolin's character. If he dies, great. If he lives, great. Same with Benicio del Toro's character. It's like, they're trying to, obviously he was kind of the Sicario, he was kind of the hitman, he was killing a lot of people, but they're trying to make him into like a hero, like hard shell, like tough exterior, but like really soft heart, heart of gold kind of thing, because obviously he takes care of the little girl. It is so fucking predictable. It is ridiculous. Some of it is very, yeah, I don't want to call it entertaining, because I don't want to go that far. It's engaging, like you watch it and you're not bored, but you're not rooting for anyone. You're literally just letting it wash over you in a very matter-of-fact way. And that is also how the film is shot, and how the film is performed, and how the film is edited, and just how the entire film is put together. It's very matter-of-fact, almost checklisty. It's like, we have to go from A to B to C in order to get to D to E and F. And you do all of that, and you do all of that well, and you do all of that efficiently, and you do it with like all the technical prowess that you need to pull off a good movie. But you're just leaving the audience emotionally unattached and unengaged. And there were certain characters in there, I mean, I actually have to say, it's like, I'm taken aback. There's one character that I had fun with. Like, most of the film I thought was quite stupendous and almost laughable, but it's because it is so emotionally unattached. I assume that's what a police officer, an FBI agent or whatever, or a soldier has to be like, in order to just do their fucking job, to be unemotional, to be emotionally unfazed by what they have to see, what they encounter on a daily basis. That kind of macabre, sarcastic sense of humor that a lot of people in law enforcement have, which I can sort of relate to. But it's also like, at least take the piss out of it or something, but just have an emotional response to stuff. But if the characters don't have an emotional response to stuff, I can't have an emotional response to stuff. That's at least what I felt like. So I was really surprised by that, because overall I was like taking it all in and what was happening, and basically watching a play-by-play of someone being taken hostage. And every now and then there is a scene that is really interesting, that is engaging and entertaining. There's an early scene with the young girl before she gets kidnapped, where we kind of get shown, not told, but shown what kind of personality and character she is, which is obviously really important for later on, for the duration of the film. And I thought that worked really, really well. Also because Isabella Moner, she's a really solid actress, and she sold it really well. Basically, the girl gets into a fight in school, and when I say fight, I mean like a proper bloody fist fight. And that is usually something that is reserved for young boys. You don't really see young girls hitting each other. And while I'm not condoning that as great behavior, but it was very refreshing to see. And also how she handles herself when she gets called into the principal's office. Because she'd go like, oh my gosh, she's going to get told off and all of that. But she was so unfazed by that. And of course it makes sense, because you kind of see, it's like, this is going to be the girl that's being kidnapped. Because she knows exactly that she's not going to be suspended. And she calls the principal out on his bullshit. And he's like, well, what you going to do? She literally says this, like, what you going to do? Because she knows that she is the one in control here, even though she has been called into the principal's office. She's the one in control because her dad is one of the most powerful people in Mexico. And Isabella Monet did that so well. I really, really enjoyed that scene. I loved that scene. People were laughing in the cinema, as in, like, that was awesome. Like, in a good way, not laughing at the film, but it's like that was like, that girl is like, wow. And then it goes into kind of like your usual territory. You know that they're going to kidnap her, and you see how the plan unfolds, which is quite interesting. But then, especially in the second half of the film, it just deteriorates into painting by numbers. That's literally what it is. And thank God Benicio del Toro and Josh Brolin are quite charming and are really good actors and are kind of like pushing that film through to the finish line. Also, honorable mention, well, not really honorable mention, but worth mentioning is Elijah Rodriguez, who plays that US Mexican boy. But he would have been such an interesting character, and I still think that he's probably more important to the film than we actually are being led on to, which I thought was quite weird. He's kind of a side character. He doesn't have a lot to do. He doesn't have a lot of dialogue. He doesn't really get much to work with. And given that, I think he turns in a really spectacular performance, because I found him very interesting and engaging, given that what he is given to do is so stereotypical that it's borderline insulting. But I liked his portrayal, and he's a very captivating young man. So I really enjoyed that. Like, from the supporting cast is definitely Isabella Monet that not necessarily knocks it out of the ballpark, because it's not that type of movie. It's just not that spectacular. But she seriously holds her own with Benicio del Toro, and I don't think you can say that to a lot of people, but she really does a good job. The terrorism plot is too generic, and that's kind of what the entire film is. The entire film falls flat, and it's just too generic. There's not a lot of details going on there. They basically name drop ISIS and the Iraq War, and then everything else just builds on top of that. It's like, we said ISIS and Iraq War, and now go and blow shit up in Mexico. And I'm like, what? And it's just really, really bizarre. The one thing, there's something at the end, which is also just in dialogue, where we basically find out everything that what we've done just now, how it actually fits into the bigger picture, what's actually been going on. And I'm not going to tell you about that, because that might be a spoiler. But it's literally just in a small little dialogue section where we find out what those guys have been doing and what they were fighting for and all of that stuff. And on the one hand, I thought that was quite interesting to see and to hear, because it kind of puts it into perspective. On the other hand, I also felt like that's kind of a bit of a wasted opportunity to not make a bigger, like a really big statement out of that. But yeah, it's just a bit bizarre. I thought that everything kind of comes full circle from the first one, where we start out, like Graver wants to start that war amongst the cartels, kind of like the whole divide and conquer routine, sort of. Then he hires Alejandro to sort all of that out, to help him, and they go after the daughter of the guy, the drug lord, who's responsible for killing Alejandro's wife and daughter. It's like a weird coincidence, or I think that is just what's supposed to happen, because otherwise Josh Brolin would have never been able to hire Benicio del Toro's character. I have no idea. But it feels like what was set up in the first one, in the first Sicario, kind of comes to fruition here in the second one. And that's why I feel like it kind of goes full circle. And that's why I'm also quite interested to see if we are potentially going into a third one, and what would happen there, and how it connects with part 1 and part 2, because I think that could potentially quite interesting. It could be quite interesting, because sometimes you just have one work of fiction, which is like a really small part of it, and then when you get like a bit of a prelude and a bit of an epilogue, all of a sudden it elevates the actual material in the middle. So that might potentially still happen in Sicario as well, like in the next iteration. Overall, I think the film just doesn't have a lot of depth. The plot is very generic. The entire film lives off the solid performances, especially by Brolin and Benicio del Toro, and clearly the film is focusing on Benicio del Toro. It's basically a starring vehicle for him. It's a trying of a character and story progression of what we've seen him do and who he is in the first one. But obviously we all know, well, most of us know what he's done in the first one, and he's not a knight in shining armor. But the second one is seemingly trying to make him do that when he's kind of like looking after the little girl. And it just felt fake. You know, it felt fake and it felt wrong, and I was a bit disappointed